All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. As you know, today's theme is climate change. And just to clarify things, I want to make sure everyone knows today's class is not about whether climate change is real or not, right? Maybe you think it's real, maybe you think it's not real. But what we want to learn today is whether it's the biggest threat facing humanity, right? So is it the biggest threat we're facing right now? That's sort of what we're trying to answer today. So again, thank you for coming, and let's jump right into it. Before we start, we have some webinar guidelines. Pretty simple, nothing too strict. Please feel free to ask any questions or raise issues at any time during the webinar. You can do this by raising your hand, and we can unmute you, or you can just text it in the chat, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Please try and participate as much as possible. Interaction equals fun. We want to hear what you have to say. So if you have any questions or thoughts or comments, make sure you raise your hand or type it in the chat. So the pretty simple webinar guidelines. Yeah, pretty basic.
So a little bit about us. My name is Julian Alexander, and I'm 13 years old, and that's my brother Brennan Pearson. And so we have a lot of hobbies. We play competitive tennis and chess. We go pretty often to Taekwondo. We're black belts. We have online and in-person music lessons. We love music. We also like to ski. We're also avid readers and writers. We love literature, and we have done some classes, some past prior classes on creative writing and poetry. And we founded SKAI in 2019, and it's been a great journey ever since. So just to give all of you a rundown on what SKAI is, SKAI stands for Sagacious Kids Aiming to Inspire, and we are a social venture inspiring education through peer-to-peer learning. And we're purely nonprofit, and we're giving back to the community. And we do this through peer-to-peer learning, teen-to-teen sharing and interaction. And so there are no adults, no teachers, and we've partnered with a couple of organizations. We partnered with Valencia College Lake Nona campus. We've partnered with University of Central Florida's Peds Academy, the first pediatric school and hospital, and Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center of Florida. So we're really grateful for their partnerships, and they've helped us come up to here. And so we're really grateful for what they have done for us. So class curriculum, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to explore critical thinking and its importance. We're going to introduce tools to help you think critically. We're going to delve into today's theme, and then we're going to see if critical thinking has changed your perspective. And if all of you saw in the beginning slide, we're going to be trying to answer the question, is climate change the most existential threat facing humanity? So we're going to go through a couple of tools and structures to see if our opinions change. So what and why? What is critical thinking, and why is critical thinking important to me? So here we have the dictionary definition of critical thinking. It's the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Basically, you're thinking intensely, critically, to create a resolution, to create your own opinion, to form a judgment on an issue. But why is critical thinking important? Well, according to Albert Einstein, education is not the learning of the facts, but the training of the mind to think. And to me, it sounds like he's saying that if you critically think, you become a smarter person, you become more knowledgeable. And, think for yourself. Don't let others think for you. In this class, we're going to critically think so we can create our own opinions. We're going to come up with a conclusion for the question that we're going to try and answer today. So just keep that in mind, those what and whys.
All right, so this is our first structure for today. It's called the card system, and this is something that my brother and I personally use, whenever we're watching the news or we're researching a topic to understand it better. It's called the card system, right? KARD, card system. So all of the letters in cards stand for something. All right, it may sound cheesy, but stick with us. K for keep an open mind. A, ask questions. R, research and analyze. And finally, D, develop foresight. All right, and if you see and this is like in sequential order, but they all tie back to the issue. So if we go to the next slide, uh, yeah, let's go to the next slide. Okay, keep an open mind. All right. And this sounds really general, I know, but it's actually really important. Believe it or not, keep an open mind. It's very important for critical thinking. All right, we want to try and let go of our biases, and what that means is if we come in with an opinion about something, put that aside for a little bit and really listen to what other people are saying, and not just be entirely biased. We got to listen to all different sides of the issue. Like I said, don't say, oh, my side is right and all the others are wrong. Immediately make sure that you're listening to other people, other sources, and actively seek out alternative perspectives. And what I mean by that, if like for example, if you're watching a lot of CNN, try listening to some Fox for a change. Even if you don't agree with the other side, or another source on the issue, see what they're saying, and that's going to help you better understand the issue as a whole. Moving on, ask questions. All right, you need to ask yourself, and by the way, you don't need to follow these like sequentially. It's not super strict as a structure. These are just like little tidbits to get you thinking about it. Ask questions like, what is the problem, who is it affecting, where is it happening, why is it happening, when will it happen, and how can we stop or prevent it. And the goal of this is to try and ask questions that challenge assumptions, whether they're your assumptions or assumptions you've heard other people making. You want to challenge it, right? And when you challenge assumptions, sometimes they lead to different questions, and different questions lead to more questions. And really, the result of all of this is you gain a better understanding, a deeper understanding of the issue. Research and analyze, and this is a really key slide. All right, obviously you got to do your research so you know what you're talking about. Like I said, and this ties back to everything else, discover different perspectives, ties back to all the other previous slides. Check for source biases. So like I said, if you're watching a lot of CNN, and you realize a lot of people on CNN are saying this thing because they believe in this similar idea, look for other sources. Make sure you understand how your source is biased. And finally, ensure source authenticity. And this one's really important, all right, ensuring source authenticity. And what I mean by that is making sure that not only what you're listening to or what you're reading from your sources is true, but also that you take it within context. Because of the internet, we kind of live in an age of misinformation and disinformation and misunderstanding. Quotes and sound bits are really taken out of context a lot of time. It's really easy. You just selectively choose whatever you want from what someone said a long time ago or from a speech. So we got to make sure that we understand what was said, or what's happening in the correct context. So make sure your source is authentic. All right, and finally, develop foresight. What I mean by foresight is, and what I think foresight is it's the ability to predict future outcomes through the observation of previous trends. All right. And this is how we do it. We have to piece together all the data and information we've gathered. All right. So we put in the effort, and we have it all in front of us. And we have to really look at our research objectively. All right. Even if we already have an idea on why we believe a certain thing, look at your research objectively. You put in the time, you put in the effort to gain it. So make sure that you're really listening to what it says. Look for historical patterns, right? So a lot of time, everyone always says history repeats itself. And it's true. You look for historical patterns. A lot of things that are happening right now may be similar to things that have happened in the past. So you can look to history to see what's happened then. And then finally, practice predicting the future by studying what has occurred in the past. So, if you see, what happened 100 years ago is really similar to what's happening now, you can look at how that ended and maybe try and make a prediction off of that. And does anyone have any questions before we move on? You can raise your hand or type in the chat. All right, I think we're all on the same page on this, so we can move on here.
So now that we have gone through and we have a base understanding of the card system, we're gonna ask: is climate change our biggest existential threat? And we have a poll here for all of you to take.
Yeah, can everyone see the poll? We've been having some weird problems with these polls, but can everyone see the poll? You can give me like a thumbs up in your screen. Okay, so I think okay, everyone has a poll. Thank God.
Okay.
When we tested it out, we had some major trouble with it. All
All
right.
right. So we want all of you to jump right in and put your opinions in. And and so I see we've got two people already answered. So we kind of want to see some thoughts in here. And by the way, if you guys have any questions concerning the card system or anything, please let us know. Yeah, I guess you could say CNN might be a little fake news. But you know, a part of critically thinking is keeping an open mind. So so even when you know some sources can be a little biased and a little bit opinionated, we always have to kind of you know be open to all sorts of opinions.
Okay, so it looks like only two people have voted in the polls. I'm not sure if that's because two people voted or we're having technical difficulties. I know Zoom has a little trouble with polls sometimes. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, if you go to if you go to the participants, it should be like on the top or bottom of your screen. Just give me a check mark if you think climate change is the biggest existential threat, and if you don't think it's the biggest threat, give me an X. That way we just know how everyone thinks, and then we can go from there.
Okay, one, two, three. Wow, one, two, three. Okay.
All right, and actually, I just got the pullback, so it's 50-50. Very interesting. All right, I'm gonna see. Hopefully you guys can see this, but I'm sharing the results. So 6 of us believe climate change is the biggest existential threat, and 6 of us believe it is not the biggest threat. So very interesting results.
All right, this is a great response. I'm actually pretty happy that we got some conflicting ideas. But who here thought that climate change was the biggest existential threat? You can just raise your hand.
Right, and if you go to the managed participants, you can also see who believes it.
Okay, so Carl, you said that you think that climate change is the biggest existential threat. So why why do you think climate change is our biggest threat?
Well, like every year we would just go skiing, right? And there would be like there would be less and less snow because of climate change. That's what my father would say. He would always tell me these stories of back in the day where um the snow was everywhere, just starting November and stuff. And here in Germany, where we are now, um, we don't get snow anymore in November.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
Yeah, because you know climate change
yeah.
and the rising temperatures. I kind of
Mm.
get it. So that's actually a very interesting perspective. Tiffany, I know that you thought that climate change was the biggest existential threat. So do you agree with Carl on that kind of perspective, or what's your reason?
No, like I totally agree with him.
All right, so who here does not agree with that? Who here thinks that climate change is not our biggest threat?
Right, and I don't I'm gonna put you on the spot, but I see that Milan said climate change is not the biggest threat. So I'm unmuting you, Milan, and you can share what you think. Why is climate change not the biggest threat we're facing right now?
Well, I feel like it's not the biggest existential threat, you could say, is because of the fact that I feel that there's bigger threats to our Earth right now. For example, pollution, I feel like is a pretty big threat. And it has a lot to do to why our Earth is, slowly faulting in certain things, pollution, things in our water, things like that, which I feel like is a much bigger crisis and threat to our Earth. But I don't think that's why I don't think that.
Okay, so we're gonna get into a kind of bigger discussion later on. But I think it's a great response. We got definitely conflicting opinions, but that's okay, right? We're always trying to keep an open mind, and so I love that all of you kind of participated in this, and I love your opinions. They're very interesting, and so okay, we're gonna go through our own card system now. And at near the end, we're going to ask this question again and see if the card system has changed your opinion in any way. Um, so keep an open mind. Those of you that think climate change is the biggest existential threat facing humanity, I want you to think of reasons why it is not, and vice versa. So if you don't think that climate change is the biggest threat facing humanity, I want to see why. Basically, do the opposite. If you don't think that climate change is the biggest existential threat, then think of reasons why it is. And this kind of leads into asking questions, A, in the card system. So what else might be a threat to the world? Why are these threats more dangerous than climate change? Why is everyone primarily focused on climate change? When are these threats likely to happen? And how can we stop or prevent them? So I'm going to kind of go over number A right here. So I want all of us to participate in this. So what else might be a threat to the world? Carl, I know you love to see, and I know you're very passionate about your snow being taken away with climate change. But what else might be a threat? What else could affect your skiing?
Well, maybe like pollution and the coronavirus too, which is like pretty much spreading and stuff. And
Yeah, exactly.
we
So
haven't got a vaccine yet, which is, well, it's not so dangerous for um like younger people, but for older people it could be like pretty dangerous.
So I like what Carl said here, because he basically said that a bigger threat that could possibly challenge the threat level of climate change is a lethal pandemic. What if we have another coronavirus, but it's worse, right? And the fatality rate is much higher, and it spreads just like how it's spreading right now. So that Carl makes a good point, because pollution and lethal pandemics could possibly way more than climate change. So anyone else have any ideas?
You know, I really like what Carl said. I want to move on to a different question, actually. Why is everyone primarily focused on climate change? Does anyone have any ideas why? Because, I mean, you hear, at least right now, I mean, not everyone's talking about it because we have COVID-19 going around, but still, a lot of people are talking about climate change. You know, it's all over the news. It's always all the newscasters, all the big newscasters are always talking or complaining for or against climate change. So why do you think that is? Why are we so obsessed with climate change? Because there are other problems, like Carl pointed out. Elise, I want to hear from you. Why do you think we're so focused on climate change?
Maybe because we're scared of it.
Right. So maybe like we know the risk, right? Because there are a lot of people who in the scientific world that are saying, this is a real problem. So maybe we are scared of it. Everyone in the world is scared of what could happen with climate change. I see Zoe's raising her hand. You're unmuted, Zoe.
Hey, I think that the reason people are talking about climate change so much is because a lot of people really haven't taken any steps to fix those things. Because, like, for example, we could easily all go vegetarian and find a vitamin supplement, but nobody does because even though there's all this awareness around about climate change, nobody's actually taking action towards it because they don't see it as the big threat that it is.
Right. So maybe it's because adding on to like what Elise said, it's a really big problem, and no, we're not really doing enough to combat it right now, right? So it's a big problem. There will be pretty big consequences, right, for humanity, but we're not really taking enough protective measures against it. I see Tiffany's raising her hand.
I also think because a lot of celebrities talk about it.
Right. So maybe because adding on to what everyone else says, because it could be devastating to humanity, right? And everyone's sort of worried about it. Maybe everyone thinks we're not doing enough. People in positions where they have a greater reach, like celebrities, they love to talk about it. I want to get to David on this. David, what do you think? Why are we always talking about climate change? You're unmuted now. I can't seem to hear you. Here, let me try this.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Perfect.
I think people are talking about it a lot because it's very dangerous.
Right. So like everyone else said, it is a pretty dangerous thing. I think we have a consensus that climate change is pretty dangerous. You know, how and you know this is a little bit abstract because of course people have been thinking about this for a long time. But how can we stop something like climate change? Does anyone have any ideas? How can we stop climate change? Right, because it's obviously a pretty dangerous thing. But is there like a surefire solution? Zoe, what do you think?
I think we can stop climate change by planting plants, trees, and we can stop climate change by reducing our amount of agriculture, because we have so many large farms, and that pollutes the soil. It's just horrible for the environment.
Right. So maybe cutting back a little bit on things like manufacturing and unnecessary agriculture.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so that could be a way to reduce things like emissions. I saw Carl had his hand up. Carl, you're unmuted. What do you think?
So I think maybe like don't use electricity unless it's needed, or like put off the light because like I used to do this before. I used to forget to put the light off or something. Right. I would go out like on trips and forget to put the light off.
Right. So maybe like cutting back on unnecessary energy spending, right? Like leaving the light on or simple things like that. So these are some good ideas. You know, we can all individually do this, you know, maybe eat a little less meat or whatever. Or close the lights, make sure we close. I know I have a lot of trouble doing that. I'm very forgetful with the lights, and my parents get so angry. You know, they're like, close your bedroom light. I'm like, who cares, right? But you know, yeah, that maybe if I start to close my lights, we can fix this a little faster. I saw Milan had her hand up. What do you think, Milan? You're unmuted now.
I kind of feel like this is a way you could really solve this in a way, is to, again, you know, stop with so much greenhouse gases. You know, we're using a lot of not only electricity, but also heat and transportation, airplanes and things like that are really causing much pollution and a lot of greenhouse gases, which are, you know, definitely a main factor of climate change, and reducing these can reduce climate change.
Right. So great ideas. We're gonna have to move on here. I want to get one more question in. I know everyone wants to get their 2 cents in, but don't worry, we have one more question. All right. What are some threats that might be greater than climate change? Right, because it seems like right now the consensus is climate change is dangerous. It is a really big threat, which I agree with. But let's brainstorm really quick, right? Because this is critical thinking. We want to try and look at different sides of this issue. So what is something that might be a bigger threat, not only to the earth, but to us as humans, you know, individually? Does anyone have any ideas? Carl, what do you think? What's something that could be a threat that's maybe greater than climate change?
Maybe like pollution.
Right. So pollution, that's a great one. Tiffany, what do you think? What could be a greater threat than climate change right now?
Deforestation. Wait, how do I pronounce?
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Like deforestation, like cutting down trees to make
deforestation, like removal of trees.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So deforestation, I think that is a pretty big problem. Ben, what do you think? Let me see. I can't hear you. I think I unmuted you. Try now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, so you know, I definitely recognize that climate change is a huge problem, arguably the biggest problem that we're facing today. But I also think that like the globalization of nuclearized weapons is also one of the biggest threats that we face today.
Exactly.
Right. So that's a really great point. So things like a nuclear war, that's a really big threat. We're going to be in big trouble if we have anything nuclear going on, whether it's a nuclear
Right.
accident or a nuclear war. So these are all really great ideas. We have pollution, deforestation, nuclear arms. So these are really great ideas. I want you to keep these in mind and keep on thinking about what other problems might be. So really the point of this is to think why climate change might be the biggest threat and why it might not be the biggest threat, right? So as we go through the next couple slides, make sure you're actively asking questions to yourself. And if you have any questions for us or comments you want to make or share any ideas you have, make sure to raise your hand or type in the chat so we can all learn from each other here. So we can move on to the next slide over here.
So we have kept an open mind, we have asked questions, and now it is time for research and analysis. So our first threat that we're going to talk about is climate change. And by the way, guys, as we go through the slides on our research, on our challenge climate change on its threat level. So obviously, we're starting out with climate change. And according to NASA, they say that extreme heat, heavy downpours, and flooding will affect infrastructure, health, agriculture, forestry, transportation, etc. All right. And by the way, guys, I want all of you to keep in mind while we're doing all of this research, we always also have to keep in mind of our source biases and our source authenticity. So, of course, government sites are the most reliable, least biased. Scientific American is actually very reliable and it's very pro-science. And they say that global warming is responsible for some 150 deaths each year. And they say that in the span of 10 years, that number may double, even if we do serious emission cuts. And they say besides killing people, global warming also contributes to some 5 million human illnesses every year. So maybe climate change could have contributed to the creation of COVID-19. It could have made leeway for Ebola. So there are some serious diseases that could come at us that could possibly harm us. And that's kind of a thing that climate change could be doing right now. And then also I'm in this last excerpt for climate change. I'm kind of relating this to current time with this whole pandemic. All this quarantine, according to CNBC, has led to an enormous decline in air pollution, which kills a total of 4.2 million people every year, and over 1 million people in China alone. And this is true because the rivers and the waters in Venice are actually very dirty, very murky, and very polluted. But since everyone is out and everyone's staying home because of COVID-19, the waters are actually very clear. And in China, they say that you can actually see the skyline, which is very rare because they're burning coal, huge amounts of coal every year, and their pollution is really crazy. So this just gives everyone, a gist of the potential devastation that climate change could pose to us in the near, 10 to 100 years. So I want all of you to kind of keep this threat level in mind while we're going through all the other threats.
Right, and two things. I'm not sure if my computer glitched or you forgot to say it, but I want to make sure it's 150,000 deaths a year that climate change caused, not 150. I don't know if it was lag on my part, but I heard 150. So it's 150,000. It's a sizable amount. And I know a lot of us said pollution was a really big threat that could rival climate change. You're right. As we see over here in our last excerpt from CNBC. Pollution kills like what, 1 million people a year, right? So and now that we're going through COVID-19, we're seeing how because we're not putting out so much emissions and burning coal and stuff, the pollution rate has gone down. So you're definitely right, all of you, that if you're in saying that pollution is also a really big problem. Carl, yes, yeah, do you have a comment or question?
How does pollution kill like humans?
Right. So okay. So don't quote me on this because I'm not an expert on any of this. We just did our own research, right? But from what I've read and what I've studied about, in a couple ways. So pollution does contribute to climate change. That is something important to remember. Like emissions and burning coal, it supposedly gets trapped in the atmosphere, right? So it does contribute to climate change. So I think that definitely plays a part in it. But uh, especially in China, there's a lot of respiratory things that pollution causes. I mean, I've been there a couple times, and you don't really see blue skies over there. It's all pretty much gray. I'm in Florida right now, and outside it's pure blue. In China, it's not pure blue. It's really just full of clouds and like these it's pretty polluted. So I think a lot of it is it causes a lot of health issues. So I don't think it just like straight out kills you like a flooding would drown you. But I think respiratory is the main thing that causes, because they burn coal and they burn a lot of pollutants. Ben, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that question. So also in like a lot of the developing world and third world countries, pollution can contaminate waters. And this will make it very hard to access clean water, which will impact sanitation. And as we know, access to healthy and like clean sources of water is extremely important in human and public health.
Right.
So, that question also, pollution can contaminate water, and then also chemical pollution from companies dumping may also lead to, the people who live off, fresh sources of water from streams or rivers, their water is becoming contaminated. So that might also pose some harm.
Right. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. Pollution can contaminate water. I mean, I think there are a couple of cases of that in America, actually. I don't know. I watched a couple movies with John Travolta in it, so I'm not too sure about that. But yeah, that is definitely a pretty big problem. I think someone else raised their hand right next to Ben. I'm not sure. David, did you raise your hand? You didn't raise your hand? Okay, so I'm not sure. But if anyone has any other questions, make sure you raise your hand or type in the chat, and we'll try and answer anything we can. So moving on, NEOs, okay? NEOs stand for near Earth objects. And that's essentially like meteors and asteroids and whatnot. So in 2017, we've discovered about 2,000 of these asteroids and meteors. And but it's important to keep in mind that about 2/3 of these asteroids and meteors that are bigger than 460 feet, we still haven't discovered. So that's just an estimate, right? So these like really, really huge ones, we still haven't found. And if you think about it, an asteroid or a meteor crashing into Earth could be pretty bad. I don't want to scare you, but UC Berkeley, in one of their articles, they said if an asteroid hits on land, there would be a huge amount of dust thrown up into the atmosphere. If it hits water, then there would be an increase in water vapor in the atmosphere. Regionally, there might be earthquakes, hurricanes, and tsunamis due to the increase in kinetic energy. If the asteroid is large enough, these could be global in impact, right? So if an asteroid hits a populated city like New York, that's going to be bad. It's going to cause a lot of death. It's going to cause mass destruction. It's definitely going to change our weather pattern. So it'll be pretty catastrophic. And if it's big enough, it could really affect the entire world. Carl, I see you have your hand up. I think I unmuted you. I still can't hear you. Give me one sec.
Now?
Oh, you're unmuted. I can hear you now.
Yeah, okay. So also I heard, I'm not so sure, I heard that there was a asteroid, but it barely it missed the Earth. It was near the Earth, like really close to the Earth, but I just heard that somewhere.
I don't know. I think it's possible. I know that there are a couple that have hit the Earth. I mean, I think it's called Meteor Crater. We visited in Flagstaff area. I think, yeah, we visited this crater in Flagstaff. That's me. I know I look really good. I'm just joking. But yeah. So this meteor hit 50,000 years ago, right? And it's 160 feet wide across in diameter, and it hit the Earth. Anywhere between 29 to 45,000 miles per hour, crazy fast. And the impact was about 10 megatons, right? The depth of the crater is 560 feet. The diameter is about 1.2 kilometers. A fun fact: in the 1960s and 1970s, the NASA astronauts actually trained for the Apollo mission to the moon in this crater. So that's just a fun fact. But it was really cool to visit this. It looks big in the picture, but when you're actually there, it looks even huger. It's like this bottomless pit, and it is just absolutely huge, absolutely enormous. But it's not even that big of a rock, right? We just said we don't know about 2/3 of the NEOs orbiting us that are 460 feet or bigger. And this was only 160 feet, right? So add 300 feet in diameter. Think about what could happen. That's a really huge impact. And yes, Carl, you have another comment?
Where is the asteroid now? Like, where did it go?
I think what happened, and this was a couple of years ago, right? But when I went there, we had a tour guide, and what I think happened was when it hit so hard, it just exploded. So like a lot of it disintegrated because it's such a big impact. But I think a lot of the chunks flew all over. So it kind of just dispersed. Some of it melted, some of it went inside to the crater, and a lot of it just flew everywhere. And I think, Nicholas, did you raise your hand? Let me see. Okay, you're unmuted now.
Yeah.
Yes, but did you have any questions or comments?
Yes, how do they know it was 50,000 years ago?
I think it's an estimate. I'm not entirely sure how they know. But they probably were able to carbon date something or tell by the fragments they were able to collect. But usually the people, the scientists that are surveying these places, they're pretty accurate. So I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure they were able to date some of the rock fragments or particles. Does anyone have any other questions on NEOs or meteor crater? I'm looking through. I don't think anyone has any questions. So, and if you do, make sure you raise your hand or text in the chat so we can move on over here.
All right, so moving on to our next big threat. We have lethal pandemics, just like Carl said.
Right. So we're going through a pandemic right now, COVID-19, and because of that, a lot of schools are shutting down, and we have to social distance. I'm going crazy in my house, stuck with my family. I don't know about you guys, but it's driving me crazy, especially my brother. But we're going through a pandemic right now. I'm pretty sure everyone here knows about Ebola. Pretty dangerous disease. It's like a humanity killer. The case fatality is around 50%, right? So that means if you get Ebola, you have like a 50% chance of dying. So pretty dangerous. And from past outbreaks, the case fatality rates have varied between 25 to 90%, right? So some of the pandemics, you had 90% chance of dying, which is really, really huge. It's estimated that about 500 million people were infected with the 1918 flu, which is another huge outbreak. It's called the Spanish flu. And at least 50 million people died from it. So these are some past pandemics that have been pretty devastating. And right now, we're going through COVID-19. Actually, you want to pull up Worldometers, Julian, to check on how it is right now live? So we have this website we really like called Worldometers, and it shows us like live stats on COVID-19. Right, so coronavirus, if we scroll down, if we scroll down, you should be able to see coronavirus. Okay, so we have, in the US right now, we have 235,000 cases. Ooh, that's huge. Okay, so right now we have 235,000 coronavirus cases in the US. And I think on March 22nd, when I checked it on March 22nd, we only had 26,000, right? So from 26,000 to 235,000, huge jump. But obviously coronavirus is really infectious, but it's not that deadly. It's not a super lethal disease. Think about if coronavirus was as lethal as Ebola, like a 50% mortality rate. that would be pretty bad. It would be super infectious, and a lot of people would die from it. So you can see right here, lethal pandemics are another huge threat that could rival climate change. They spread quick, and they have the potential to kill quite a few people. Yeah, so I think we can go back to the slide right now.
And if any of you guys want to know more about, coronavirus, you can take a look at our Decoding COVID-19 webinar. And our numbers are a little bit outdated now because, there's a rapid spread rate for COVID-19. You can actually compare the numbers from our webinar from that date to now, and you'll see a huge jump. And so if you guys want to learn a little bit more about this disease and how it's affecting us, you can just go on our YouTube channel, SKAI.org, and take a look at that. But setting aside pandemics, we're going to go into more of nuclear power, and I'm talking about World War III. And so Metro.uk estimated that nearly 6 million people dead, homes flattened, and millions more poisoned by a huge plume of radioactive poison, which would spread for 130 miles. Radiation can linger on for a long time and spread for a lot of miles. The OTA envisaged up to 80% of the population of the U.S. being killed immediately, with further casualties from radiation. And those are the results of a modern nuclear war. And a part of researching and analyzing, we need to go back into past events. So here from history.com, we're looking at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombing. And this happened in World War II when America bombed these two Japanese cities. And that kind of resulted in the end of World War II. But they say here the explosion of Hiroshima wiped out 90% of the city and immediately killed 80,000 people. That's like right on the spot, 80,000 people. And tens of thousands more would later die of radiation exposure. So I can only assume that the number of people would gradually go up over a set of years. And then 3 days later, Nagasaki was bombed, and that killed an estimated 40,000 people. And now you might not think that's a lot, but 1945, 80,000 people in Hiroshima was 20%, more than 20% of their population, and 40,000 was a little bit over 15% of Nagasaki's population. So when you kind of get into the percentage setting, you can kind of see that they did wipe out a lot of people, and the radiation would cause the percentage to go up rapidly over a number of years. And by the way, I want to I don't know if Ben's still here, but he kind of mentioned this about nuclear war and the nuclear possibilities and the consequences of this. But this is kind of an analysis on the conclusion of World War III and how it could end up. And then now we're looking at aging nuclear power plant meltdowns, and this is a pretty ongoing topic. And I know some people want to combat climate change by getting rid of fossil fuels and importing nuclear power plants. But here are some of the downsides. So according to the EIA.gov, they say that in December 2018, the United States had 98 operating commercial nuclear reactors at 60 nuclear power plants in 30 states. The average age of these nuclear reactors is about 38 years old. Their oldest one was built in 1969, so it's around 50 years old. Some scientists say that nuclear power plants can live up to 80 years. Some say that can only live up to 40. So I'm pretty sure we don't want to take the risk. We want to be safe, but we have 98 operating commercial nuclear reactors. And then according to BusinessInsider.com, they said that in April 1986, a reactor Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and this is a true event, caused an explosion that sent out a cloud of radioactive particles across parts of Europe. It was the world's worst nuclear disaster and the equivalent of 500 nuclear bombs. So the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's times 500. That was the amount of devastation that happened in Chernobyl. And according to National Geographic, they said that for more than 30 years on, scientists estimate the zone around the former plant will not be habitable for up to 20,000 years. So this is a huge catastrophic event that happened. And think of this. We have 98 operating nuclear reactors, right? This was just one plant that blew up. If we have all 98, that's 90 times 500. You're going to have a huge, disaster. This is going to be wiping out Earth, right? Tiffany, you have a question? Tiffany?
I actually watched a show about Chernobyl on HBO. It's really good. It tells the whole entire story and what they did to fix it, and like what was the whole entire problem and what happened. Like, how did this happen? They also explain like how did it happen.
Yeah,
It's really good.
Yeah, that was a very great series. My brother and I actually watched it, and actually we're gonna feature a video right from the HB thing. But it's totally informational and it's very educational. It teaches you the results of nuclear power, and it shows you the true events of what happened inside of Russia. And so I'm gonna let everyone take a look at this short video,
which will extend approximately 200 kilometers and likely be fatal to the entire population of Kiev, as well as a portion of Minsk. The release of radiation will be severe and will impact all of Soviet Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarusia, as well as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and most of East Germany.
What do you mean, impact?
For much of the area, a nearly permanent disruption of the food and water supply. A steep increase in the rates of cancer and birth defects. I don't know how many deaths there would be, but many.
For Belarusia and the Ukraine, impact means completely uninhabitable for a minimum of 100 years.
There are more than 50 million people living in Belarusia and Ukraine.
60, yes.
And how long before this happens?
Approximately 48 to 72 hours. But we may have a solution. We can pump the water from the tanks. Unfortunately, the tanks are sealed shut by a sluice gate, and the gate can only be opened manually from within the duct system itself. So we need to find 3 plant workers who know the facility well enough to enter the basement here, find their way through all these ductways, get to the sluice gate valve here, and give us the access we need to pump out the tanks. Of course, we will need your permission.
My permission for what?
The water in these ducts, the level of radioactive contamination.
They'll likely be dead in a week.
We're asking for your permission to kill 3 men.
So this was a short clip. This was actually one of the best clips in this entire series. Very intense. And if you heard what they said, these scientists basically said that it's gonna destroy over 60 million people, and their lands that are housing over 60 million people are gonna be uninhabitable for a minimum, which is very conservative, a minimum of 100 years. And this is not like a prediction. This is what actually happened. But luckily they contained it, so it didn't happen. But if they had not done that, then it would take a good part out of Eastern Europe. And even now till today, Chernobyl won't be habitable for over 20,000 years. So that's the amount of power nuclear has. And so that's kind of the devastating properties it holds and the devastating results that it can produce. So now we're going to go into develop foresight.
And really quick, not to interject, but if you guys are interested in watching Chernobyl, I would highly, highly recommend it. It's a really, really crazy good film. You can find it on HBO. You just type in like HBO Chernobyl. Little warning: there are some scary images of like the people who were poisoned, who had like radiation poisoning. But I really enjoyed it, so I would highly recommend it. If you're interested, you should definitely go check it out.
Yeah, definitely watch it with the family. I don't suggest watching it by yourself. If you did that, you'd be very brave. I know I couldn't. But now we're getting to D in the card system. Yes, I see a hand.
What was it called?
It's called Chernobyl.
And that's it.
Yeah, it's a part of the HBO series.
Okay.
And, so I think like 3 or 4 episodes. But it basically runs you through the entire course of what happened during that time. But now we're going into developing foresight. So now we're going to discuss a little bit about the likelihood of these threats, when they're going to happen, and the potential result. So starting out with climate change, likelihood, inevitable, right? It's been happening for the past billion years, and it's going to happen for another billion years, right? You're always going to have it one way or another. When though, we're not completely certain, but we can only we have a strong, confident assumption that's going to be now through the next century. But we do know the potential result. It will be absolutely catastrophic. There will be property loss, recession, food shortages, and there will be a lot of panic. And to kind of run you guys through, how there would be food shortages. Of course, there's global warming, so temperatures rise and icebergs melt, right? And a lot of scientists are saying this. And so sea levels rise, and there's more water vapor, so there's more rain. And the more rain there is, it floods the plants, and sometimes animals need those plants for nutrients, right? And so if those plants don't have the proper regenerative process, then you could see a big food shortage, because these animals are not getting the specific food that they're planned to get. World War III, likelihood improbable. All right. When, we have no idea. It can happen anytime. We have really no idea. But the potential result is absolutely a nuclear Armageddon, right? Just mass death and destruction. And like we saw in the small excerpt back in a few slides back, they said that if the U.S. was bombed with a nuclear arsenal, then 80% on the spot would die. 80% of 365 million people living in America, 80% of them would die. All right, and probably all of its land would be contaminated with radiation poisoning. So nuclear power plant accident, the likelihood is actually very probable. All right, as we saw from the EIA government, they said that the age range is about 38 to 50 years old. And so if there really is no reinvestment in that kind of technology, then you could see a big meltdown. When, we have no idea. It's very hard to tell. But the result, we go back into past events and we look at what happened in Chernobyl, and we can just relate to that, but probably 10 to 100 times worse, because our we have about 60 to 90 power plants in the U.S. and if those blow up, it would be completely catastrophic, right? A pandemic, and I know we're facing this right now. COVID-19 is really hitting us, socially, physically, and economically. But the likelihood is inevitable, right? Climate change does contribute to big pandemics, and so it is inevitable. When, we don't know. Of course, we're facing one right now, but if we weren't, we don't know when the next pandemic is going to happen. The potential result, though, is just like what we're facing right now. It would be economic fallout. I know America has a huge unemployment rate right now, and we're about to go into a recession. I think we're already in a recession, and there would be lots loss of life. And just think about it: if there was a lethal pandemic, like I'm talking a really, really bad pandemic, worse than COVID-19. What if you had a COVID-19 mixed with an Ebola? Because Ebola cases range from 25 to 95% mortality rate. So you're most likely going to die if you get Ebola. And COVID-19 spreads like crazy, right? So if you have that kind of spread rate and you have that kind of kill rate, then it's the perfect disease to kill humanity, right? It'll make the human race go extinct. And then this is probably the most mysterious threat and the one we don't know much about. NEOs, near Earth objects, likelihood unknown. When? Can't say, right? It's still unknown. But the potential result is just as threatening as all the other threats, right? As we saw in the meteor crater, it made a huge dent inside our Earth, right? And that was the size of 160 feet, and it was coming down at 50,000 miles per hour. So they said that 2/3 of bigger than 460 feet still need to be discovered. We're talking about doubling and tripling the size of meteor crater. We're talking about bigger than 460 feet, coming down probably faster than 50,000 miles per hour. It could create enormous, an enormous catastrophe. And I don't know if any of you have watched Armageddon, but it kind of explains and predicts the result of an NEO hitting Earth. But of course, it's a movie, so they avoid the whole crisis. But what was that?
Tomorrow.
All right, and I think Elise raised her hand. I saw Elise raise her hand. So Elise, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah. I was wondering how asteroids even come down.
Oh, okay. So like asteroids. I'm not sure. So you're like, how do they hit the Earth?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm pretty sure like we're constantly getting hit by like space debris, like these little rocks or particles. They're constantly hitting the Earth, right? But they're blocked by our atmosphere. They burn up before they ever reach the ground. But then there are these like really, really huge meteors or asteroids, right? Because like if I mean, we don't know this for a fact, but supposedly the universe is like infinite, right? Because it's constantly growing, so it's infinite. So that means that there must be a ton of these like little space particles, and they're bound to be really huge ones, right? Because they just clump together, and they just clump together, like all these small ones clump together and form a really, really big one. And you can't really stop this; it's inevitable. So inevitably, one of these sees the Earth and is headed on a path to the Earth. And once it's really close, maybe it gets sucked in by like our gravity, and eventually, if it's big enough, it'll just crash in and make a huge explosion, right? And there are theories as to how we can solve this. Has anyone watched the movie Armageddon? Okay, so I see Nicholas watched the movie Armageddon. It's a pretty old movie. Like, my dad loves all these older movies, so he made us watch it. But it's an older movie, so I don't blame you for that. But in the movie Armageddon, essentially there's this huge, huge asteroid, a meteor, headed for Earth, and it's about to hit us, right? So the world sends like a team of guys, and they plant these explosives on the asteroid and like explode it and knock it off course, right? So they avert the disaster. So, but right now the problem is we can't really do that. So like that might be a solution to an asteroid, but the problem is we can't really do that right now. And I think Nicholas had something to say. Yes.
Oh yeah. Never mind. I watched a different one.
Oh, you watched a different one? Yeah. Okay. So there are a lot of these movies about asteroids. I think another one my dad was telling me about is called Deep Impact. I don't know how he gets all this time to watch these movies, but Deep Impact, that's another movie if you're interested. I've never watched it, but there are a lot of these asteroid or meteor movies, so you could definitely knock yourself out binge watching all of those.
So now we're gonna ask the question again: is climate change the biggest existential threat? We're gonna put out a poll. And so now we have gone through our own card system. And so I kind of want to see what are your differences in opinion? Because we've went through all of the possible threats. We've gone through climate change. We've gone through nuclear Armageddon. We've went through power plants being destroyed or melting down. We've gone through lethal pandemics. So I kind of want to see some interesting results and maybe you guys have changed some opinions. But so I see here 3 people have answered. Okay, so a lot of people are voting for
Open for like maybe 20 more seconds. Make sure everyone has a chance to get in on this.
By the way, does everyone see the poll?
Yeah, I think everyone sees it. So iPad 3 says no. That may I think so. Since if you're on the iPad, you may not be able to see the poll because I know there are a lot of restrictions on Zoom for for like mobile devices. But if you're on computer, you should be able to see. I see Carl has his hand up. Yes, Carl.
Yeah, so it doesn't really work for me. It says poll could not be submitted, but I say yes.
Okay, so if you weren't unable to see the poll or you were unable to answer, just
No, I
make
saw
sure
it.
you, yeah, just
I
make
saw
sure
it.
you hold up your hand and then we can get to everyone there. So let me end the poll really quick, just so we can see all the results. Okay, so only 6 of us were able to vote, but 67% of us said it's still the biggest threat, and 50% of us said no, it's not the biggest threat anymore. So I want to see why you changed your mind or why you didn't change your mind. So for those of you who said climate change is still the biggest threat, why do you think that? And just raise your hand virtually or physically. Okay, yes. Why do you think that you're unmuted? Why do you think it is still the biggest threat?
Wait, did you say still isn't or still is?
So if you think that climate change is the biggest threat, I want to hear why you think it still is.
Oh, okay. So I think it's the biggest threat because scientists say that climate change is like killing a lot of bees, and bees do like 50% pollination. So we won't have flowers and other things similar to that because like we'll have a lot less because bees won't be around to pollinate most of them.
Right. So it will definitely impact our ecosystems probably in a negative way, right? So it would damage bee populations, which take care of a lot of the pollination that goes on. So very astute answer. I like that a lot. I know there are 2 other people. Okay, Steve, what do you think? Why is climate change still the biggest threat in your opinion?
Well, I think that a climate change is the most probable and most likely event to occur. And also, I think it contributes to like pandemics. So it's kind of like a 2-in-1 kind of sort of
Right.
thing.
So climate change sort of sets off maybe a chain reaction, you could say. It really affects a very wide variety of things like the ecosystem, like rising sea levels and pretty much everything there is out there. Like you said, pandemics. It could maybe facilitate the spread of or likelihood of us experiencing pandemics. So very astute there. I like that a lot. I know Zoe had her hand up. Zoe, why do you think climate change is still the biggest threat? And you're unmuted.
I think there are. I put yes and no for the for the poll. I think there are some that are more like damaging if they were to happen, but the one that's most likely to happen, in my opinion, is climate change. That is happening, and I think it's the only one that we can try our best to prevent. The only one that we can do something about.
Right.
So
you brought up something Steve said.
yeah.
So it's like an inevitable type of thing, right? We know that it's happening.
Yeah.
We know that it has happened before, and we know that it's going to continue to happen. And this is something that maybe we think we can address directly, right? We can do things like Carl said, shut off your bedroom lights or the bathroom lights. Maybe don't eat so much food or don't binge while you're watching TV at 3 a.m. at night, right? My brother's very experienced at that. But so climate change is inevitable, and it's something that we can address directly. Now I want to hear the flip side. for those of you that have changed your mind or have stayed with the opinion that climate change is not the biggest threat, I want to hear from you. So I see Elise raising her hand. Why do you think climate change is not the biggest threat, Elise?
I don't think so. It's the worst threat because maybe coronavirus could get like worse or or any other yeah.
Right. So like
So
a lethal
maybe
pandemic.
there could be maybe the COVID-19 could mutate possibly, or it could become more dangerous, right? Or we could get another COVID-19, but infused kind of like an Ebola kind of type one, where it has a very high mortality rate and also spreads like crazy. Tiffany, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah. I saw this thing where this guy recently died on a bus because there was he had this disease that was worse than COVID-19, and it was like with rats or something. So I think maybe COVID-19 might be worse than climate change, and other stuff is worse than climate change, like Chernobyl. Like the way people died from Chernobyl was terrible. Like no matter how much protection you wear, and if you're still near it, you're still gonna die in like a matter of a week, like they said.
Yeah, that is true because there's so much radioactive contamination. The gear is practically it doesn't even matter when you're in that environment. There's so many particles just hitting towards you. So I definitely think we got a great response here. I know a lot of you had changed some of your minds and some of you didn't, but that's okay. We're always open for new ideas, for new opinions, right? And so I kind of want all of you to just keep the card system in mind, right? I know there's a lot of politics that's been happening, so don't just go on one website and not the other. Try and look at all different perspectives, because that kind of gives you a better understanding of the issue and how to approach it. So I think we had a great response here, and I think a lot of you were very opinionated, which is great. But I think that at the end of the day, we have to address all issues, right? Because they're all dangerous, all very harmful to humanity, and so
Yeah, and one quick final note. And this class was sort of to see whether we could change minds or whether we could look at it at a different way to see whether climate change is the biggest threat. But you got to admit, all the threats that we talked about today, they're pretty scary threats. Chernobyl, nuclear, pandemic. These are some pretty scary threats. I mean, I think that we can all agree we have to sort of yeah, I think what I might be interested in doing with you guys is forming a petition to the government for them to open a military branch designed to combat existential threats, like combat climate change and pandemics and whatnot, because they're all pretty scary threats. But yeah, great job, everyone. It was really great to hear all of your opinions. I think we all really took it very well in stride. I know I put a couple of you on the spot, but you all answered very well, and you were able to look at everything objectively and keeping an open mind, and asking the right questions and really coming to your own conclusion. Right? That's the purpose of today's classes, is to not to let anyone else influence us too much, to really come to our own conclusions, which is I think what we did today. So I'm very happy about that.
So anyone else has any final thoughts, questions, please contact us if you have any feedback. And tell us what you liked about the class, what you learned, what you might want to work in on future classes. But if any of you don't have any other final thoughts, you're free to go. Thank you for joining this webinar. Our contact is skywork@yahoo.com. And for more information about some of our upcoming events, you can go on our website at skyorg.com. And so thank you for joining, and we hope to see you all soon.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And we'll stick around for like another 2-3 minutes if you have any feedback or questions or comments. But yeah, like everyone said, we've unlocked the cage. You're free to go. You have freedom now.